Hello, everybody, and welcome to Connected Conversations on Science Streams. I am so happy to have Hezekiah Branch here with us for this episode in the nice warm month of May, the end of May. Memorial Day weekend coming up. I'm in my nice cold basement, thankfully, instead of the heat of upstairs. And Hezekiah, welcome in. Great to have you here. Uh, please tell us about yourself and what you do.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is Hezekiah Branch. I'm a recent graduate of Tufts University, where I studied cognitive brain science and currently studying data science at the master's program at Tufts. A lot of my research interests revolve around thinking about computational methods in cognitive science, which is a pretty broad field, and hopefully we'll get into that a little bit later. And I'm also very interested in computational neuroscience. So, thinking about different ways in which we can apply these computer systems and algorithmic approaches to networks in the brain, as well as focusing on distributional semantics, which thinks about really the way in which humans process language and how words that are similar tend to appear in very similar places. So very excited to be here and talk to you all more about my work and my field, as well as answer any questions that come up during the conversation.
Yeah, so one of the first things, and I thought about this earlier when we were talking before this started, was how many people I've talked to that are in kind of AI that also delve into language. It
Mm.
seems to be a very common overlap. Am I seeing that correctly?
Yeah, yeah, you definitely are. I think when you really pick apart some of the origins of AI, of artificial intelligence, I think particularly folks who are maybe a little bit more interested in philosophy, in linguistics, there's a lot of overlap in the way in which we represent these different systems. So, these topics come up a lot. For example, you've probably heard of, if you're in philosophy, you've probably heard of the Searle's room argument, where you're kind of distinguishing, what we would call like weak AI from strong AI. Thinking, if I'm able to kind of manipulate symbols, um, is that the same as representing knowledge, or is that really just me manipulating symbols
Mhm.
and not really doing anything important? So we've kind of moved on from that a little bit and gotten to really complex systems, but there's definitely a ton of overlap. Um, I think language is common because at least in the industry, there's a lot when you think about chatbots, when we think about things like Siri and Amazon Alexa, and a lot of those things run on AI. So, it's a pretty lucrative field if you have a lot of the technical expertise to really work on those types of projects. But I think even in more so academia, we're finding that there's a lot of really cool problems that we can approach in language and psycholinguistics and whatever domain you're working with, where you're working with speech and you're working with semantics, where AI is really, really useful.
Yeah, so that makes sense. And they also made me think of the word encoding, right? So in
Mm.
like in decoding as well, if you're thinking reading, because I'm getting into education a little bit, because there's that
Yeah.
overlap, right? Because you mentioned that you're getting away in AI from that more simplistic view of just finding symbols and decoding them, just like you would if you were learning to read, right?
Mm.
So we're trying to get beyond just reading. Now we're going to something else beyond that with AI. Is that what you're kind of saying? Am I on the right lines?
I think you're on the right lines, but I also think there's a really tempting rabbit hole in AI where, um, like, people really want to work on things that are really hard, like a
Mm-hmm.
lot of CS folks tend to want to do. Where in like reality, is really good to really think about like the simplest solutions to problems. And um, I think a really common misconception is that if you're working in AI, and you're working with artificial intelligence or machine intelligence and a lot of the different fields that fall under that, you're trying to take the human brain and replicate it, which in reality isn't really what's happening. We're kind of looking at, especially if you're in cognitive science, you're looking at, these different faculties of the brain, and you're looking at these different mechanisms and thinking about how maybe we can represent those in a computer system where that learning process, as you mentioned, whether that's reading, whether that's recognition, whether that's, whatever we're looking at, can kind of be learned by these computers through data that's collected and through these really math underlying a
Mhm.
lot that drives those computational processes.
So when I know there are several projects where they're trying to map brains, whether it's a fruit fly like a Drosophila, as well as the human brain, which I'm not going to
Yeah,
say it's impossible. It'll happen at some point probably, but it's that's when you get the singularity or something when you can do that. Um,
yeah,
and so and there's something to being able to even take the smallest neural network in an organism and be able to map that out, correct?
yeah, yeah. It's useful. I think it's so interesting because a lot of what we know about the brain, or a lot of the ways in which we think about the brain, is constantly being updated. And in a lot of ways, it's still a black box, and there's still, I feel like we're just now hitting the surface in terms of what we know the brain is capable of doing. So of course, that provides some limitations into how we would represent and translate that to machinery. I think even neural networks is an example of that. When you think about how we represent the different networks and the different layers of the brain, of course, we can't do that exactly, but can we find a process that works and achieves a very similar, very analogous result? And of course, networks, there's always like different types of neural nets that are coming out that they're realizing, maybe this one works better than this version, or in this particular case, it has better trade-offs than this type of neural network. So there are folks who really just focus on building those.
Now, can you maybe tell me and others the difference between, because I think there's some confusion over the field of neuroscience,
Mhm.
AI, and cognitive science.
Okay.
Like, because I think some people think of one and they think the other. What's the difference?
Yeah. So I think you named three. So there's neuro, there's AI, and then there's cognitive science. I would say while they share similarities, they're still pretty distinct.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the skills um, that would be required of you to really go deep into one field might not necessarily translate completely to the other, and there's a little bit of a learning curve if you're trying to navigate between the three. I'll say neuroscience, it's really the science of the brain, and the word itself tends to focus a little bit more on some of the biological concepts of the brain. So you're getting more familiar with some of the more cellular components of the brain, and thinking about how, from a biological perspective, those different parts of the brain can interact, and thinking about the processes behind those, which is a bit different from cognitive science. I would say cognitive science, you're not really focusing as much on um, a biological level. It tends to focus a little bit more on, um, from a conceptual level, the different um, mechanisms that are involved in the brain. So, for example, a problem that might appear in cognitive science is figuring out which part of the brain is really good for dealing with recognizing faces, for example. And if there's some sort of lesion in that part of the brain, or there's some sort of damage that happens to that part of the brain, what happens? That's a pretty classic example of cognitive science. And I would say AI definitely requires a lot of technical skills. I would say it's probably the field between the three of those that um, is probably like the most popular buzzword, at least in the tech industry, because it's, you know, a lot of folks think it's pretty lucrative to have AI that can handle a lot of the frustrations they've had when it comes to solving customers' problems. So I think that's a little bit of this the split between AI in industry and AI in academia. Um, and you're really thinking about machines learning more so than you're thinking about humans learning. And you're also thinking about um, also a little bit of systems design in the way that we're building and representing things. Not as much looking at how like a human brain is really approaching those problems. Like that's part of the process, but it's not the process in itself, which I think distinguishes it a bit from these other two fields.
That was a great answer.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And you're probably thinking of something else later that you left out.
Yeah.
I always think of the neuroscience being more of the biology, whereas cognitive science being more of just, I don't know, the thinking itself. I don't know if that's, that seems to work for me okay.
Mm.
Because you should be able to, you can do cognitive science as far as psychology and thinking in those terms versus, cells, which is sometimes in the neuroscience part. Well, there's definitely more overlap than there used to be, right? I mean, we really know that there is a definite connection between the biology piece and that what manifests as our actual consciousness in our mind. Which brings us to your research. Kind of what is it that you're doing day to day, like this year or coming into this next year? What are you looking into doing?
Yeah. 2021 has definitely been a bit of a whirlwind. I've had the privilege of having, several different roles um, within, I think really all three of the domains that we just talked about, thinking about neuro, thinking about cognitive science, and thinking about AI. So I started this past year working at Tufts Medical, which is in Boston, and we're really thinking about how to predict tumor growth in glioblastoma multiforme, which is one of the most aggressive forms of brain cancer. And the lifespan for those who have glioblastoma, or more commonly GBM, is pretty small. It's pretty short. So we really wanted to think about, you know, working towards providing the first cure towards this type of cancer. And if we couldn't do that um, alone through biology, was there any room for these algorithms and these machine learning approaches, which is a subfield of AI, um, to really solve this problem of inhibiting a tumor before it becomes really malignant and mortal. Uh,
Hey, Jeff 750, thanks for stopping in. Yeah,
hey,
Hezekiah, any questions that you got? You think of any? The question I had, like one of the things that I've done is like citizen science, where you go on to like Zooniverse, and they'll give you these thousands of people, thousands of images, and you go and you help the AI train to see certain things.
mhm.
And I've heard of research where they take like slides of cancerous cells or potentially cancerous cells and train the AI to pick out which ones actually are and are not cancerous. Are you following me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
And so
following.
you get better at, because we as people are pretty good at it, right? So if you could speak to that, and we also have a question from Desh here as well, you might be able to answer.
Yeah. So I think when you're working with images and you're training, there's a lot of processing that goes on behind the scenes, and there's a lot of different techniques that we use to make sure that images that we're working with, um, and I think a more realistic case, if they're not at the best resolution, what can we do to kind of improve them so that if we
Mm-hmm.
create a model or create, this pipeline um, driven by artificial intelligence, and we want to, for the example you provided, predict um, whether it's harmful, this is a harmful substance or not. Um, how do we one train a model? So when we think about creating models and particularly in machine learning to accomplish a task, the process that you usually have a data set, which is hopefully been cleaned and is hopefully ready to be used, and you kind of feed it into, we feed a section of it into a model. Usually it's like either 70 or 80%, and then you test on that remaining amount that you've held out on. And there's a lot of different techniques you can use to try to like play with it and tune it and make it perform better, and hopefully work toward building something robust. But I think a lot of folks don't realize that, particularly in biology, one of the hardest parts before we even get to the process of using a model or even using a neural network to work on images is getting the data in the first place. It's a very, very hard problem, particularly working with human data, particularly having enough human data to do something significant with. Um, so it's pretty common in biology to have um, a very small data set that you're able to work on, um, and so that's an ongoing, that's really an ongoing research area of finding ways to um, work with small data sets, as well as there's an ongoing research area to work with really massive and humongous data sets with billions and billions, if not larger, um, records that would be used to create these models. Um, I would say, in addition to that, maybe not as much when we're looking at um, tumors, but definitely when we're applying this to more so like consumer side products, maybe like using your face to unlock your computer, for example. It gets a bit into what we would call algorithmic bias and algorithmic fairness, um, which again really starts at the data collection phase, as well as it starts at the um, experimental design phase, in a way that we're really thinking through um, creating things that don't just apply to one type of person or one group of people, but really could be used by and includes everyone.
I'm reminded of one of the problems they had with facial recognition. I think it was on the on Apple phones, was that it didn't recognize people when they first woke up in the morning, because you look so much different the first thing in the morning. And then like people couldn't unlock their phones until they got up, washed their face, and then looked at their phone, and they got so it's one of those weird things where like you don't even think of that when you're designing it. That you have to take into account what people look like when they wake up in the morning.
Yeah, yeah, and that's definitely one case of, I think, where um, testing is really important, as well as um, being very inclusive in the people that you recruit to get this data. Um, I think even like a little bit more nefarious examples where people from the same race were able to get into each other's phone just by showing, these like similar characteristics that these models uh, have been trained on. And I think that's something that's getting more attention within maybe like the past 3 or 4 years, and it's still growing. Um, but I think we're realizing as the problems we're tackling become more complex and require a little bit more expertise, it's changing the way in which we do things and the way in which um, we work as, I think, a larger scientific community to address these issues.
And Dash, if we didn't answer your question, right, let us know, because he asked, what are the applications of artificial intelligence in audio and video quality?
Hmm.
So I'm not exactly sure what that means. You might know what it means, Hezekiah, but
Yeah. I think That's a good question. I know a really, really important breakthrough is thinking about compression. So there's a lot of different compression algorithms that can be used where you might want to work with different formats of data and thinking about ways in which you would represent that between um, different platforms or different machines. Since I think we talked about encoding, I think more on like a education perspective, but it's also encoding in like a theoretical computer science perspective as well. And those different data formats, when we kind of move between different um, types of representation, and I think mathematically we would call that discretization. Sometimes there is leakage, or sometimes there's information that doesn't always transfer over. So there are folks who are looking into finding ways to address those problems. It does require a lot of math that I think is very hard to find. I think the exact field would probably be linear algebra or numerical linear algebra and a little bit of calculus. So just like a lot of really advanced math, but um, there are also folks who are trying to kind of take the math and put it in like a very easy and friendly method to use it so that pretty much anybody can contribute or do like open source work in this type of field. So hopefully that answers that question.
Now, I want to digress a little bit.
Mhm.
Because you talked about linear algebra. And I won't say I'm scared of linear algebra
Yeah.
so much as apprehensive. Right? Like Calc 1 was as far as I got.
Yeah.
And I did fine. But it's daunting for students, particularly, middle school is always that splitting point, right? Now, for yourself, you can only speak for yourself sometimes, were you always that math science person, or did at some point you kind of like, you're kind of like, yeah, I think I can do that, and you just kind of did it, or was it like, yeah, this is awesome, I'm going to study my ass off and do this? What was it like for you?
That's a good question. I feel like when I was really young, I'm thinking like second, third grade, and I'm thinking of math. I feel like I tested well in math, but I didn't like it. I remember my
Mhm.
mom buying me this book. I think it was by Danica Patrick on why math doesn't suck. I think it was the name of the book, and it didn't help. I was like,
You
I
still
don't
remember it though. It must have had some kind of impression on you.
like. I remember the title because the title was just so blunt, but I don't think it really hit me. I don't think I really started enjoying math until I took my first statistics course.
Mhm.
Because at that time, the only things I really thought about math were, I think, more related to algebra and geometry, but I didn't really think of statistics as math. Like I thought of it more as like business. Like
Mhm.
if you go into a company, you go into the workforce, um, and you're like doing financial, working with finance data, um, then you'll be using statistics. But yeah, I took my first statistics class, and I think by the second or third week, I was like, I could see myself doing this as a career. And I was, I believe, in 10th grade. I took AP statistics in high school. Uh, yeah, I was like, yeah, I want to do this. And by the time I got to college, I really just stuck with it and ended up taking just multiple statistics courses um, throughout in different departments. I took like biostatistics, I took ecological statistics, I studied, behavioral statistics. Um,
You did. If there was a statistics class, you took that thing, didn't you? You're
yeah,
like,
I was
oh, I
like,
didn't take this accounting statistics yet. I want to take that.
I almost took a financial accounting class because I saw I had statistics in the syllabus. I think there's even like a child studies, like advanced statistics for child studies. And then I started like taking math courses that I thought would help me get better at statistics. um, which they were relevant. I don't know if that was the right approach, but like discrete math, I was like, I think that might be useful. Or linear algebra, I was like, I think that might be useful. But what I didn't realize is that the models we were using in statistics were the same models that we would use in machine learning.
Ooh,
And so I
you just
said,
stumbled into that one, kind of.
I really did. I really just was like kind of by accident ended up here. Um, and I knew I always was like really passionate about health and thinking about improving quality of life, but doing it more from a research perspective than like a face-to-face one-on-one. Um, and from there, kind of just like went from like statistics to machine learning to health machine learning to somehow cancer research at Tufts. It was pretty much like accidentally falling into pretty much every passion that I ended up acquiring over the past maybe like 8 to 10 years. Yeah.
Awesome. So it's like mainly that statistics piece. And I think statistics is actually really good at especially the high school level or even earlier because so much math is taught just for math's sake. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
statistics, there you teach it with application right away.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, you're doing a coin toss. What? You're playing cards. Yeah, I mean, you can't just. There's always some kind of application to the statistics. You don't
Yeah.
do statistics for statistics' sake. Maybe you do. You would be able to tell me, but it's like usually there is something you're doing it for, which I think kids could latch on to better versus just why are we doing calculus? Oh, because it's fun. We're like, what? No,
Yeah.
no, it's called physics. It's. I think it's good to have. I'd like to see more statistics earlier. And like one of my daughters was complaining about statistics, like, oh, dang statistics. I'm like, what are you talking about? Of course, it's kind of like your mom talking to you earlier. It's like, you know,
Yeah.
like, come on, statistics is great. Everyone should be
Yeah.
able to do an analysis of variance.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. I think definitely being able to apply it um, and really have like real world examples that I could connect to what I was learning was what sold me on stats. And I don't think that's impossible to do for other fields of mathematics. But I also think there's a lot of, I think culture makes a big difference in math.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I feel like there are a lot of folks who, when they first came into mathematics, went through like a very common process of being humbled and kind of build a culture that if you're not being put in a position where like you can succeed, but you have to really like be brought down and humbled in order to be deserving of that success, tends to really be recycled throughout different types of instruction. And I think we don't see that as much with stats because it's so prevalent in multiple fields. There's
Mm-hmm.
really can use a statistician in literally like I'm finding a hard time thinking of a field that would not benefit from someone having a background in statistics. Um, and I think that sense of communality between fields when it comes to stats makes it something that people feel more comfortable, not gatekeeping as much as you might see with uh, maybe, you know, multivariable calculus or advanced linear algebra or things like that.
Hey, Mark, welcome into the chat.
Hey,
Thanks for the comment there. Remember, it's nothing from stats class, but it was interesting. Yeah.
yeah, I hear that a lot.
I
yeah,
liked it. I did educational statistics. I did like biostat stuff as well.
yeah,
And the best part was it was all the same stuff. It was just application of the same thing. So it's like, I can get an A in this. I can get an A. That's probably what you did too. You're like, all right, it's the same thing. I'm just going to apply it slightly differently to this other topic. And come out on the other side knowing a little bit more.
yeah. And I think that's a cool pattern. I think people are seeing that too. So I'm seeing more of a shift away from memorization and then shifting more to like developing a conceptual understanding. And I think it will only serve people because I feel like everybody should at least have a try to work towards developing a basic level of stats. Just because we get so many different claims and so many different campaigns and ads and all sorts of stuff like that. That if you're not like able to, you know, somebody post a graph and probably it's probably a pie chart for the most part. Uh, and they post a graphic and you can't go, you know what, this looks a little misleading. I'm kind of interested how they might have, collected this data. I'm kind of interested in how they calculated these results. Then you can kind of be manipulated to really believing a lot of different things based off of faulty math and usually faulty statistics.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a way to know more about something. I mean, that's what it is, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe an idea of what's true, what's not. I mean, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, as they say. I don't like your statistics. I'll find someone else's.
Yeah, that does happen. Yeah.
In Marcus, I don't think it's necessarily an easy A, only because it depends on your teacher.
Yes.
Like, I think if I had to learn statistics from my educational statistics teacher, I wouldn't have been as successful. But because I think I had a good foundation with a previous statistics course I had taken, it kind of laid the groundwork. So just jumping into it is not necessarily going to be easy. I don't want anyone listening to be like, "Oh, I didn't think it was easy." Yeah, okay, yeah, no, it's not.
Yeah.
It's all perspective. It can be if you have the right teacher or you're prepared properly. You had a good teacher, so it's an easy A. Exactly. Exactly. So.
Yeah, I also feel like the deeper someone goes into not just stats but math in general, the harder it gets for them to kind of work their way back to teach someone else and like reel them back into where they were at. So it's pretty cool if you can find someone who's been doing not just math but just like a particular field for a long time and is still able to share it in a way that other folks would get as engaged and as passionate about it as they are.
Okay, let's keep talking about education.
Yeah.
One of the things that I find, and it's been something that people have been talking about a while, is the disconnect between theory and practice, right? Right. You guys in academia come up with all these great ideas about teaching and cognitive science and how to best teach. But that research never walks its way over into the classroom necessarily. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that, or because I got thoughts, of course. I'll just talk forever, but
Yeah.
I want to hear your thoughts on it.
And you're asking about like field breakthroughs and teaching those.
Right, like if you come up with a discovery, right? You're like doing cognitive science, and you're like, oh yeah, we have this thing that if you teach something this way, it will be successful with these kids, right? And often there's this large body of knowledge that doesn't seem to find its way into the classroom. I mean, you spent some time in the classroom yourself, so you can speak to that a little bit.
There's definitely there are a ton of factors that go into that. I think for one, I think a lot of folks really stick with teaching fundamentals because I think they realize it's a little unrealistic to keep up with every breakthrough or every discovery that happens. And not only in terms of teaching that material and hoping that the people that you are teaching in whatever age group or whatever education level you are teaching can understand what you're sharing with them, but also have the skill sets that they need to learn what you're giving them and also go in and try to figure out things that they're interested on their own. And so I think because of that, folks tend to stick with maybe information that isn't as updated or is still useful, but is not necessarily where the field itself is at. Also thinking about, what resources are teachers really equipped with to be able to handle those types of lectures and handle those types of teaching moments. If you're working with a really large group of students and you don't really have either the staff or the budget to really make it work for everyone, it can be kind of tough. Not to mention the teachers themselves would have to learn that same material and then be able to break it down in a way that students can also learn from as well. I think that's definitely um, one example. Um, I think a field that does that a lot would definitely be cognitive psychology and thinking about ways in which we teach our understanding of human cognition. Kind of push against the idea of saying like we prove, X, Y, and Z, which is a pretty different from math, which is full of proofs. But because of that, folks are really careful about what they allow into their syllabi and what they allow, because everybody doesn't necessarily do cognitive science on the same school of thought. So there can also be a lot of discrepancies between the way one department and one school teaches these particular topics and the way another school teaches it, depending on, or even how at the same institution two different professors might teach the same or what should be the same material. I think that speaks to that as well. And I also think even from my experience, there's a ton of separation between what you're able to access if you are, for example, attending a public school versus what you may be able to access where you are attending a private school. Um, Not only in terms of, I think we think about um, income and we think about money as pertaining to family levels and pertaining to education, and what might get passed down. But I think it's also important to think about money in terms of teachers and their experience and what they're willing to accept in terms of compensation. And if you're not able to really compensate teachers fairly, even though they might be really awesome with students and they might be able to bring in a lot of expertise, how are you retaining them? If you're not really providing them with the things they need outside of the classroom, it can really be hard to keep them in the classroom. And sometimes passion isn't always enough to do that. So there's definitely a lot of um, maybe differences in quality of resources and quality of what students are able to get from when we're thinking about sending students into schools to really maximize their learning and really focus on these topics. Like I've seen that firsthand. Like I even during undergrad, I had a lot of peers who attended private schools that were ranked top 1 through 10 in the United States. They're top 1 through 10 in whatever country they might have been coming from. Um, and they would say, "Oh, I remember learning maybe in like a senior level econ class, and like, oh, I learned this my sophomore year of high school at my private school or my boarding school, where someone else this is really their first exposure to it." And so the professor is like, "Okay, I have students on this end who had these advantages and have these different teaching styles that's pretty hard to find, but I also have these students who I need to prepare and I need to get them where they need to be. So it can be hard to really facilitate those different um, learning styles and learning outcomes when you are still yourself trying to stay updated on the material as well.
You went a lot of great different ways with that.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but you kind of like after you said it, I was like, that's what I should have expected, right? Right? You got to hit the nail on the head there. It's kind of like, why it doesn't matter what the research says if you can't implement what the research says, basically.
Yeah.
Which is true. And you can say as many things as you want, but it's like, yeah, smaller class sizes, even if research says it's great.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. So And I think that's a really good point you made about that. So that's good. Um, let's see, more education thoughts. So you taught at kindergarten, you said,
I did.
like, and then at
I
middle
did.
school, right? Different
Yeah.
experiences. Yep. Uh, tell us about that.
Yeah. So I graduated from high school in South Carolina. So I taught elementary school students. I taught kindergarten, Spanish early in the morning. I had a pretty large group of students. And I was, I think at this point, my junior year of high school, working with a teacher throughout that year.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, I was pretty sure I wanted to do education as a field of study in college, and I wouldn't end up changing that until my freshman year. But that's like a different story. So working with kids, it was awesome. I think it really just confirmed that okay, eventually in my career, I am going to teach. And I kind of have an idea on like where I would like to be doing
Mm-hmm.
that and what exactly that might look like. But I think it was also so cool because, especially in that age, they're really looking to you not only um, to really like be a teacher in the sense of like, oh, I'm gonna learn this new thing because sometimes attention span it can be hard to it can be hard to keep for young kids. I just happen to have a group that they really did love the format that I was using to teach. So it was like a combination of like hands-on Spanish learning, and then we would do like a little bit of digital learning with different clips. Like I might show like a Looney Tunes clip in Spanish and like have them kind of sound out the words and translate it, and it worked really well. But then I also realized I had students um, who might have had parents who were Spanish speakers, or might have been Portuguese speakers, or are non-English native language speakers, and thinking about okay, how do I get them to not feel like they're bored by what's happening, and get them to really still feel like they're included in the process. That was a really important part for me to think about when I was working with kids and really developing a sense of being a really great teacher for them. And then I also had students who are still thinking about um, how they were socializing with other students and working on socio emotional learning. And I remember I had a student when I first started, it was like almost silent. And I was like, okay, there has to be a way for me to make sure that the student isn't feeling left out, not in a way that's gonna like be obvious to be like, okay, I'm really singling the student out, because nobody wants to like be singled out, but think about, okay, what can I do a little bit at a time to just make sure they're really integrated into the classroom and feel like they're making friends and really enjoying this childhood experience. So it was really great to see that student open up and get really involved and take on like leadership positions in the classroom. I thought that was really awesome. So yeah, that was elementary school, with kindergarten, and then middle school was totally different. Um, I feel like middle schoolers go through like a perpetual awkward phase in like a lot of different um, like in a lot of different ways. Um, I think one just developing. I think boundaries is important because that's something that I'm learning more about. Um, Thinking about sometimes I think they start to question more than a kindergarten class to be like, oh, why are we learning this, why are we doing this,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to do this. So you have to keep them really engaged and think about cool ways to keep them engaged and why it matters. And I was working with a pretty large, it was pretty much a full classroom that I had for the first period that I worked with, and then the second period wasn't as large. um, but it was really great to work with them, and of course they love food. So if you could ever connect with the
Oh
food, they're
yeah,
like, hey, I
yeah.
love
Give
it.
them the food.
So yeah, that was awesome. And then of course having them like work on projects and work on things where they're not just being talked to, because I was like, I don't even like being talked to as an adult. So I'm like, these kids, they're not gonna someone just come in and talk to them or talk at them all day. Like really making it like a conversation and really giving them opportunities to work on things that they actually like and they actually find relevant. Um, and then when I came to undergrad, I was still working with youth in the Boston area. I did that for
Mhm.
about 2 years. About the same group. I didn't have as many middle schoolers, mainly K through fifth grade. But then I also ended up teaching adults, which was a little crazy.
Oof.
Um,
Adults
I,
are like middle schoolers, except they're hairier. Yeah.
yeah, and they have a lot of different requirements. I worked with, interestingly enough, totally different groups of adults. So the first internship I ever did in college was at Harvard Graduate School of Education, and I was working with at that time it's called PPE, Programs in Professional Education. I believe it was the largest department at that time. So we had all different kinds of folks that were coming in to do like education programs, certificate programs, which is really cool because the first program I was in, they were coming there to go back and become principals at different public schools. So like the same kids that I was previously working with, now I'm working with the folks that would really be leading their school experience. That was pretty awesome. I made a lot of great connections and um, really got to see them like really participate. Harvard really does like the case study approach, so they would collaborate and go through these case studies. And I think the most important part for me was just to hear about their experiences at these schools, and they were really, really candid about things that they thought they were doing a good job with, but also things that they were really um, a little bit frustrated with that they were really looking to solve with the program. And a lot of those sentiments were shared throughout different leaders, both in public schools, even for the programs that were focused on folks at the university level. So that was just really awesome to hear. But also knowing that, okay, some of the problems that I thought I was recognizing as a high school and middle school student, it wasn't just me. Like other people are thinking, these are things we could fix. Um, and then also the last one I worked with were academic librarians, which is a really fun group. Working with librarians, I feel like there's like a library culture, and it's always fun to see people who I feel like a lot of librarians are really passionate about, libraries not only being a place to get books, but being a place for communities to have access to a lot of different things. And also, just love books and love to read, which is something that I like to do. And
But
yeah,
we'll talk about that later too.
yeah,
Your
yeah,
your book choices and everything. So I mean, I think it's good that anyone that works in a field like yours has experience with kids at a young age and middle school and adult, because you can
yeah.
really that psychological development helps you kind of think about the human condition.
Hmm.
You also get that if you're a parent, right? And you have your
Yeah.
own kids at your age, you can kind of see when they acquire language and how the learning happens and everything. It's kind of an eye opener in a way, where you have that way to kind of think back on what you've done, and you're like, oh yeah, okay, I don't know, to add some kind of dimension to what you do. Um, as a person, and education is extremely important, of course, but I think in like cognitive science and psychology, it's like you could study kids all you want, but if you don't know any, you know, if you've never
Yeah.
actually spent time with a kid, how well do you actually know any,
Yeah.
and how they think? So
That's
I think that's
yeah.
I think it's good. It's one of those things where I almost feel like most people should take some time and be in a classroom of some kind, whether it's adult, middle school, kindergarten, fifth grade. And of course, if you ever want to go back into public school teaching, Hezekiah, we will welcome you with open arms.
I appreciate it. And I was gonna say,
Whatever
I think,
state you want to go to.
yeah, I'm open. I was gonna say, I think a lot of people agree with you about being in the classroom because I know at Tufts, if you're in the child studies department, there's actually a preschool within the department,
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
where students can like observe students and really get a sense of what that classroom might look like. I was like, that was pretty cool.
Yep. And it's also a different experience too. It's kind of like don't criticize other people's kids until you've had your own.
Yes.
You know, kind of thing. Like, don't
Yeah.
criticize a teacher until you've actually been in the classroom for at least a day to a month. You know?
Yeah.
And then you kind of know what it's all about. So it's always a good experience. And I'm sure you learned a lot. And the fun thing is, you don't even learn a lot like academic. You learn about yourself as well.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
because like, especially when you do middle school, you think back to when you were in middle school, and you're like, oh, this did suck. Oh,
Yeah. And it was interesting because the middle school I was working at was actually the middle school I attended when I was in middle school. So I was like
oh man,
seeing the same teacher. I saw my old locker. I was like, like it's really hitting really, really hard.
I've come full circle,
Yeah. It was actually
and it still smells like Axe. And
always somebody somewhere. Yeah.
usually one of those things I ask on like parent night for like eighth grade. I always go to parents. I'd be like, all right, raise your hand if you enjoyed eighth grade. Like, none of the parents raise their hand. I'm like,
No.
that's all you need to know right there. Okay, parents? This
Yeah.
is going to be a rough year.
Yeah.
You get through it. Congratulations. We'll do it. So, I mean, that's my goal. My education philosophy is usually, you know, kids don't hate science when they're done. They find it fun. That's the year. When you start hating things, it's usually eighth grade. You hate your parents, you hate the world, you hate your friends, you hate everything.
Yeah.
It all sucks, man.
Yeah. I think first impressions are definitely important. Like I remember even speaking to old teachers of mine and them talking about how they didn't really like they thought they hated a subject and it wasn't either until they got older or until they became a teacher themselves that they actually like, if I had learned this differently when I was younger, I might have actually liked this more than I thought I hated it. I hear that all the time. So, that's definitely another one.
Oh, that happens. It's one of those things. Like even at my own kids, it's especially going up to a school. It's like, oh, you had that person for a Spanish teacher. You're gonna hate Spanish from now on. You know, when you're like, it's like it shouldn't be that way,
Yeah.
but it is. You're like, and you're like, all right, we'll try to make it as good as possible.
Yeah.
Oh well. It's just too bad that everyone kind of goes through that experience. I think. At least once.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I got that teacher. My friends got this other teacher. Which is just, it's good too, because you always have that one teacher, I think, that you're like, you thought you were going to hate the subject or a class, and then you get into it, and you're like, wait a minute, this is really neat.
Yeah.
That really
That
like
happens.
this.
It does. It happens.
Which is the opposite, which is also, that's the yin to the yang, or the electron to the positive, or whatever, opposites. Now, I'm going to go back from education back around to predictive tumor growth,
Mm-hmm.
right? Back to your research, okay? Back to the AI piece, right?
Okay.
Right, going from education back to the AI, because I'm still curious about how it is we can predict cancer using AI, which is what you're trying to do, right?
Yeah.
And you said you were getting huge or small, either one, data sets that you then have to feed into the algorithm, then have it spit out a number or number of positive cases or something like that. So, is that correct?
Yeah, it's typically the process. I think when you move between different levels of maybe the term, I don't know if I'm using the term right, but I guess maybe different levels of granularity might be the term. I think what you're able to observe changes. So it can be really common that the number of human participants you get in an experiment is pretty small. Like, let's say you only have 30 people, which might be small for someone who considers like having over 100 to be the norm, which is also very, very, very hard to get in practice outside of college students. Um, but let's say you have that 30, and you only have like a certain set of hospital records that you could use, and you realize it's not really great for predicting cancer. Well, can you actually look at their biological information to see if there are patterns between um, these different cancer patients and think about, okay, now I can kind of detect similarities, I can detect different patterns in their biological data that allows us to make these predictions. And so, you know, so far we've seen machine learning can be pretty helpful with doing that, particularly when we look at things called signaling pathways. So there's a lot of different communication, not only between regions of the brain but also um, the different substances that make up those regions. So if we're looking at different genes, and we're really looking at um, mutations, which is really a fundamental part of cancer. Um, on when these communication pathways are taking place, where does the signal go wrong, or where does the process go wrong? And what we find is that um, really, I think maybe like within the last was 2021. So maybe like the last 4 years or so, there have been a lot of observations that these particular set of genes tend to be like these major players for really messing with the signal that would usually cause a normal cell to die, but now it's mutating and really causing some damage. Um, and so, for example, I think one example that might be like KRAS, for example, which is has a lot of a couple different invariants that we see with different cancer mutations, not just in brain cancer, but in different types of cancer. Or we're looking at ways in which we can look at SHEP2, which is a different type of protein that we see in these types of cancers, or MEK, so like MEK. We're just like
Mhm.
we're seeing these different usual suspects in this cancer research, where we kind of have an idea that they might be really good signals for predicting where the next bad communication is going to take place, which will lead to tumor growth. Um, but how are we able to, deal with that? So something that folks are really interested in, to hopefully not deal with a lot of the disadvantages that we might get from chemotherapy, but really like targeting and be really intentional about the targets we hit for cancer, is looking at, okay, can we inhibit these signals? Can we just block the signals and stop it? And in that case, does that really just cut the process off? Uh, so those attempts, which I think really started kicking off in the early 2000s, um, like they tried to just see if they can take these usual suspects and inhibit their telephone lines when it came to causing these mutations on these, what we're calling these signal pathways. Um, what they found was that the resistance um, really prevented any sort of inhibition from blocking tumor growth. And what we call that is called adaptive resistance. That plays a huge, huge, huge problem on thinking about cancer treatments, thinking about the ways in which we try to um, therapize. Um, and so, a pretty recent development um, is looking at okay, we've tried to inhibit and it really didn't work because apparently these problems are a lot more resistant than we thought they were. So instead of just trying to inhibit one of these processes that lead to mutation, can we try combinations of inhibitors? I think that research is pretty recent. I think the one that was most relevant to the project we were doing with GBM, I think was either a 2020 or 2021 publication. So it was like super, super recent. But what that team found is that when they were able to combine these blocking methods, it actually did lead to some pretty optimistic results. So of course, there's a lot more that has to be done on like testing and
Right.
whatnot, but it
And a
seems
lot
like
of these, it's
where it goes.
also, from what I understand, it's sometimes, if you can do it in like the lab, in situ versus, actually in a cell, because a lot of times that tumor, like I said, it's been adapted, like it can prevent the drug from getting into it. So you might have a way to change the pathway, but you have no way to get it into the tumor to, actually interact with the cancerous cells. Um, so, and I was just reading about that recently. That's why it came to my mind.
Yeah.
And ways to break that down so you can actually get the medicine, because that's another realm of research as well. But you're talking mainly that pathway where you have the gene that does the signaling, which then causes the cancer, right?
Mhm.
And then you have a whole bunch of fancy letters and numbers like P53,
Yeah.
which are
Yeah.
which are the those fun genes slash proteins. Um,
Yeah.
right.
Um,
And like for your what you do though, in like for your day to day, like is it that you're just at a computer crunching numbers?
no. I feel like hmm. Okay, because it kind of varies because I feel like the work that I do is pretty uncommon. So usually when you find someone who is doing a technical field, they usually just like sit on the one track and just do that one field. So if they're into software engineering, then they're probably like I guess if we're staying on this if we're staying on this topic of cancer research, they're probably working on software that could be used in a lab for research purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Versus if you have someone who is, let's say, a data analyst, they're really working on looking into insights into this data. Maybe you have um, reverse phase protein array (RPPA) data, or maybe you have like RNA sequencing data. Maybe they can look into mining different patterns or different insights that you would draw from that. It's more of like data analyst, data science work. Or you might have like a machine learning engineer who's really responsible for not only creating models, and for biology, the key problem that um, is humongous beyond just creating like advanced models is building interpretable models. That's a continuously ongoing problem in biology. Maybe they're working on building models and also thinking about larger pipelines for deploying these models in practice.
Mm-hmm.
So usually someone sits within like one of those domains. Interestingly enough, I kind of like zigzag through all of the above. So sometimes I am literally just coding on my computer and crunching numbers. That's my like data analyst work. Um, Sometimes I'm a
Okay.
bit more on like the machine learning side of things, like actually thinking about different trade-offs with different models and different technologies that would be really useful. Or maybe I'm really like communicating it, with a researcher or with a PI and getting a better sense of what they're doing. Um, and I think the more you go towards like a traditional cognitive science lab, the less like software type coding you would be doing. It'd be more maybe like R,
Mm-hmm.
and using like R and like a lab workspace.
Right.
Um,
So it's kind of like you're working with a team,
mhm.
right? And maybe if you're a software person or you're a data analyst, people will come to you, or you will go to them to help them. Kind of be like, well, we have all this data. We need a software to be able to parse this data and give us, this kind of value to know if what we should be going after. Is that kind of like that's what I'm hearing?
Yeah, and if you're on the software side of things, particularly in this realm of science, like there is a huge push to make things more open source, meaning like everybody and anybody
Mm-hmm.
should be able to contribute. So the software you're doing is probably working on some platform that's really enabling that. Like I know Harvard has uh,
Like
the web,
GitHub.
and yeah, they have a GitHub repo that pretty much anybody can contribute to, and it allows researchers from anywhere to be able to use different data sets and like create visualizations and draw insights on it. Like that's usually the type of work that you see usually at hospitals and
Mm.
different types of institutions.
That's just crazy. That just blows my mind that you and other people do that. My coding experience is very little, um,
Yeah.
but but I get that. Now, what's your take on that? Open source is the best source, Marcus says. Yep. Um, what's your take on the importance of kids learning to code?
Yes. I think it's humongously important that kids learn to code. I think at the very least, even if they don't necessarily like it or they know, this is not really something that I want to do, at the very least, having exposure to it, um, and at least having like a level of thinking to know, even if they're not able to implement some crazy project, whatever, just having an idea of how the technology itself is running. But I do think it's super important that kids know about coding because a lot
Mm-hmm.
of the future is really um, moving towards these more advanced technologies, and I think the more you're able to keep up with it, the better. And kids are usually at a place where um, learning is pretty integral to their development, and they're able to pick things up a lot faster and actually really integrate it into um, like their internal model of the world. So I saw firsthand. I used to work with some of the founders of. I don't know if you're familiar with the Scratch programming
Mm-hmm.
language
Yep.
out of MIT.
Oh yeah.
But I was working with them in Boston in South End, and we were able to work with youth. It was actually called South End Technology Center. If anybody wants to look that up, it was the first Fab Lab number 001, first Fab Lab outside of MIT. It's pretty historic. And we were working to see if we could use programming to help students in Boston Public Schools to really work on projects that they enjoyed. And that was fun for me to be back in my old neighborhood, working with youth, seeing them really work on projects um, that they cared about and were relevant to them. Then we took it and did it at the Boston Children's Museum, and that was huge. I think it was like over 500 students that came through and got to work on some of the physical computing things that were really dependent um, on that programming language. So I think from that there's a lot. So you already see how relevant and important it is for kids to learn how to code. We're also thinking about different formats in which we could teach students how to code. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe they're not opening up GitHub or opening up Visual or doing something like that, but they can use different formats of coding, maybe drag and drop programming languages, or maybe different user interfaces to still coding. Like you're still putting these this logic, the logic of it is not changing. I also had a colleague of mine who was using augmented reality to teach
Hmm.
students how to learn science. I was also at Harvard Graduate School of Education. It was pretty awesome. I got to see like some of the early development stages. I think this was back in 2018. But I'm sure the project is like still taking off. And basically, students could like do a dissection, but it was like in their vision of learning. Like it's not virtual reality, like augmented right
Yeah.
here, like in front of them. And they're able to see, like we're not just cutting um, this frog or this cow heart or whatever, but we're really able to like once we're here, like we can see all these different annotations and connections. Um, And that's a way that kids are learning. They're gaming already. They got Oculus Rift, and you have all of these really cool technologies. You got Pokemon Go and Niantic and all these crazy things that are already using um, these blended reality technologies. So it's pretty cool to see that same translation happen in the classroom. And I do think that's going to be, I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. I
No,
think that's
it's not going to stop. You are
going to
correct.
be a trend. So I think it's super, super important that kids are able to be a part of that experience and really see their innovations and their imagination come to life through code.
All right. Wow. You just did like the promo sequence for code.org in Hour of Code. You didn't even know it, and you did.
I didn't. That's hilarious.
They're going to hit you up next year for Hour of Code to do their intro. But yeah. And Darkmark, you're not doing any Python streams? You're learning how to do Python. I thought about learning Python, but I'm like, I don't know. I did JavaScript for a little while. That was it for me. But Python is the big language right now. I don't know what you're using, Hezekiah, but like everyone's doing Python right now. So
yeah, I'm definitely using Python. Really for machine learning, it really usually comes down to Python and R. I like Python more because I feel like the community keeps it more updated. Like I use Pandas, which is a pretty popular data analysis package within Python, and there's like a scientific Python, and there's a lot of really cool tools to use within it. But in school, we were actually taught C++, which was very hard, and I would not recommend at all. It was a lot of work. A lot of work.
C++ is like, I hear, is like, that's the coding to code. Like that's the the basis of everything pretty much.
Yeah. C++
it's like, forget Unreal Engine. I don't need to know how to use that. I'm going to go straight to C++.
C++ is, you literally have to do everything. Like you're not doing as much as you would with like C, like that's where the plus plus comes from, but like you still are literally doing everything down to like memory management.
Right.
It's a lot. But if you're into physics and you're into like Pixar, like I know they use a lot of C++, or a lot of like video game developers use it because there is a lot of control you have over like the physics of different objects and how much you can implement.
But what I hear most of that is they'll use Unreal, but then they can get into the guts if they need to change the C++ plus if they have to, like if they need to do the management of like memory or something, they can go into it and mess with it.
Yeah.
But they're gonna actually do most of it probably in like, using Unreal Engine or something.
Yeah. Usually I see Unreal. I think Unreal 3D is pretty popular, or Unity, or Maya, and they'll use that too. And then they'll like expect you to have a pretty strong level of C++ when it comes to like object-oriented programming for different types of classes and thinking about templates and namespaces and all this crazy stuff that I don't think a lot of Python people really want to. I don't think they want to do that. Python is just hard,
Well, why would you? If you can do what you need to do using Python, why would you do something else? That's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I have you here today. So we're going to play a game. We are on Twitch. We're talking about gaming a little bit. And since you're into AI, I figured I'd ask you 3 questions about intelligence.
Okay.
All right. And if you get these 2 out of 3 of these questions about intelligence, mainly Mensa, as we know, are the most intelligent people out there. One of the lucky viewers will get a sub to the stream. So, are you ready for some questions about Mensa?
I will try my best. I might get them all wrong, but
you might get them all right too.
Let's see. I hope I get one.
Right. Okay, so
cool.
Question number 1. Like many Mensa members, When Adam Kirby joined the British Mensa group, he enjoyed reading Shakespeare and learning languages.
Mm.
An entirely unremarkable piece of information if it wasn't for what fact? A. Adam was just 2 years and 5 months old. B. Adam has a severed corpus callosum. C. Adam was reading it in a hexadecimal that he translated from a language that he created.
Are these times questions?
Nope. You take your time.
I think I'm going to time myself. I want to go with the one that just sounded the most realistic. I don't know. I'm going to go with the A.
You are right. Adam was just 2 years and 5 months old.
Yeah, it makes sense.
That makes sense. Yeah, perfect sense. Everyone reads Shakespeare and like everything when they're 2 years and 5 months old. Yeah, that's what I was doing at 2 years and 5 months old.
Of course.
I couldn't read jack squat when I was 2 years.
Yeah.
Maybe another 5 years. All right, next question.
Cool.
You're doing good so far. 1-1.
Yay.
Which of the following is a quote from a Kanye West rant after claiming to score 98%, a 133, on a Mensa IQ test?
Okay.
A, I'm great. That's all there is to it. Me and Trump, we're up there. B, for me to say I wasn't a genius, I would just be lying to you and to myself.
Mm.
C, imagine if you cut your skull open and someone were to touch your brain with their hand. How would that hurt me? That's how it hurts me when people try to tell me what to do.
That's funny. I feel like I could see him saying all of the above. I feel like definitely the first and the last one. What was the end of the question? I feel like I didn't hear the end of the question.
Which of the following is a quote from Kanye after a rant claiming to score 98% on a Mensa IQ? So he's ranting about being a genius, basically.
And what was the second one? I'm gonna take
Second
the
one.
first one.
For me to say I wasn't a genius, I would just be lying to you and to myself.
Oof. Kanye.
See, they're all plausible. He's so crazy.
And all of them, I'm like, I could tell them. So I'm gonna take out the first one. The third one is felt. I guess if it's a rant, it's not a tweet. It's a rant.
Well, it was a rant on Periscope that was on Twitter. So, right, just to qualify it. So it was ranting on Twitter, but it was Periscope. So.
Periscope. Periscope's like the Facebook type thing, right?
It was a Twitter live feed.
Yeah. Okay.
Basically.
I don't know. I'm still kind of stuck on the second one, so I might be wrong, but
Go for it.
sure. I'll say the second one.
It was actually B and C. He said both of those.
Wow. Okay. I'm not surprised. Not surprised at all. That makes sense.
It's a funny little rant if you look at it. I went through a lot of it. He compares being a genius and getting his brain messed with to being a beautiful woman or something.
Just jump in.
Classic. All right, question 3. You already got 2 out of 3, so you're going to go for the full thing here. You're going to get all of them right. This is going to be great, right? Right. So, more about Mensa. According to Sophie Gilbert, who is a one-time Mensa member and a journalist, what special interest group can you enjoy in the Washington, D.C. chapter? A, a nudist group. B, a LARPing group.
LARPing?
You know what LARPing is?
Live action role playing?
Yes. Okay, you got it. Or C, Primes, which is a group for remembering prime numbers.
Primes?
Yeah.
The first one I feel like would be cool, but I don't know if that's special to DC or like why you couldn't do that on your own. So I'm gonna say no to number one. I might be wrong. Two was LARPing, also in DC for Mensa. Hmm. I guess based off of people that usually qualify for Mensa, want to would they be LARPing? Hmm. I think I'm naturally gonna think of Primes. I feel like that would be like the obvious choice.
You're putting a lot of thought into a question and you've already won the game. This is
Sorry,
very,
I
very
just
good of you.
like once I think of something, I'm thinking of like 20 other things at the same time. So
Yeah, you are. Wait, I could see the wheels turning in your skull.
yeah, I guess logic. I guess it is a logical answer. So I'm out with one. I'm thinking of two and three. LARPing would be cool. I think it's definitely more interesting than C. But because I think it's more interesting, I'm gonna say no to B. I'm gonna say primes. That's probably wrong, but I'm gonna say
You're wrong.
primes.
It's a nudist group, of course. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
God,
oh, you said
all those
nudist
smart,
group.
yeah,
I thought you
nudists.
said Buddhist.
No, not Buddhist, nudists.
Well,
See, you would have chosen nudist if you had heard nudist,
I'm
right?
not a, I don't know.
All those
Priority.
smart people like to get naked together, I guess, or at least a large proportion of them. I don't know. I am part of neither group. So
Wow. That's hilarious.
funny. Let me see. Where is that article? I'll share the link to that article in the chat if someone wants to read it. That I looked up. That it was pretty funny to read. Um, about being in Mensa for like a year.
Well,
Not the artificial intelligence, but the real intelligence.
okay.
And they don't like to be called geniuses because they're not. They're just normal people that happen to get a really good grade on a test.
Yeah, genius is a. I feel like it's an interesting term. Is that a loaded term?
It is a loaded term.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is very loaded because it's subjective, essentially.
Yeah.
You know, it depends on who you are and how you determine that it's genius worthy or not. So
Yeah. Some content validity threats for sure. For
yeah.
sure.
All right, let me get in here and I will gift a sub to somebody here. That was either here earlier today or is here right now. Now, I am definitely going to keep in touch with you.
Please do. Please do.
And because there were so many other interesting things to talk about. Like, I'm thinking I would love to have you talk to like my class before our code. I know I joked about it, but
Yeah.
you know, but a lot of my kids, of course, are like, coding, something else I have to do. You know, some kids love it, of course, naturally. You don't have to convince them of anything. And some kids naturally hate everything. But usually if it comes from me, of course I hate it. I'm the teacher. I'm the big, mean adult in the room. But maybe coming from Hezekiah, it'd be a little bit different.
Maybe. I hope so.
You hope so. You can hope so. We can try, right?
Yeah.
All we have to do is try and see, you know, and see what it is that will motivate these kids to maybe get into some coding. I did enjoy the one time I did teach coding. It was a lot of fun, mainly because you can see kids that kind of get into it. You know, they have a you know, a definite you know, knack for it. You know, but I think it's even better to find the kids that didn't know that they enjoyed it and they can discover something new about themselves. That's always good as well. So, when did you first code? I didn't even ask you that. Like, when was your first experience, like sitting at a computer and plugging in?
That's a good question. My older brother was definitely more interested. Like there used to in Boston, there used to be the store called Building 19. They were a department store in Dedham. I remember he got this really old like C++ type CD. Like that's how old like we're still
Oof.
using CDs. And he was like trying to build some temperature thing in like a For Dummies book. And I remember watching it, I was like, there's no way I would ever do that. A few years passed by, and then I was in high school. And my best friend and I, we were just sitting in class. I remember like the morning show, they were like, oh, are you interested in like building apps and learning how to code? You know, if you're interested, you should, you know, try to do it. And I think I filled it out or like said I was interested, not really knowing where it was gonna go. It was just like, oh, you know, that looks cool. Let me just, you know, do it and see how it goes. And I ended up staying in that program. It's called R2I2 in South Carolina. I ended up staying there for 2 years, and that really led me to um, really think about coding and building mobile apps and deciding to stick on that path um, in college. But like a younger version of myself would have never like if I told my younger self now that I would be pursuing a master's in computer science, I would be like, nah, like that's not happening. So it's kind of wild how things just did like a complete 180 and really went deep into the CS of things.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's like either when you've been doing something a really long time or you've reached like a point in your studies where suddenly you look around and you realize that you're kind of like an expert in a certain thing,
Hmm.
you know. And I think that happens when people start coming to you for advice on something and you're like, why are people asking me? They expect me to wait a minute. I'm the
Yeah,
person. You know, I know these things. You know, it's kind of weird when that starts happening. Either, you know, it can happen earlier in your career or later, or for certain things and not others.
yeah. I think I'm still working to. I don't know. I feel like I'm still feel like a beginner in a lot of ways. Like I know I've been doing it for a little
You're
while.
always a beginner. That's the way you feel like, you know.
Like I feel like I'm just like there's still so much more. Like I feel like I don't have enough years left in my life to learn everything that I want to learn. So it was interesting, like getting asked to like do speaking events and do conferences and stuff, and I'm like, am I ready to do that? Like I don't know. It's kind of early, but you just do it. Like you just go up there and you like I know what I know now, and you know I might
Mm-hmm.
not know. Well, I definitely don't know a lot of what I don't even know that I don't know. But you know, maybe somebody can learn something from the things that I've done or the failures that I've experienced and the pivots that I've had and the resets that I've gone through. And you know, maybe she can impart some wisdom to someone else who's trying to get there as well.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting topic as well. Maybe for
Yeah.
another chat about your the failures and the stumbling that goes along. It's not all, you know, hearts and rainbows. Uh,
Yeah.
Getting
Yeah.
to where you are, nor will it be that way in the rest of your career either. You know, it's
Yeah.
that's just part of, you know, your life. You know.
Yeah. I would say if you don't like failures, research probably won't be that fun because you do fail a lot. Yeah.
I have learned that talking to a lot of researchers in a lot of fields.
Yeah.
You have to be comfortable with that failure. And the problem is, I don't know what you were like when you were a kid.
Hmm.
Kids have a distinct fear of failure, you know, and it's hard to. I think coding does help, and I think Marcus Darkmark would agree with this. You know, coding helps you get over the fact that you fail because, you know, when you type out the program, you press run, and it doesn't work. You essentially failed, but
Yeah.
you have to just get back and you do it again, and eventually, it's awesome when it finally works, and you're like, yes, you know,
Yep.
you have that fear moment where, you know, you've been successful.
Yep. And I mean, sometimes you really just do fail in the design.
Mhm.
Sometimes you really just do forget a semicolon and everything else kind of fails. And you're like, why do I have a sec fault? It's been like 6 hours. You're like, you just forgot just that one little grammatical thing right there. Um, yeah, I think as a kid though, I liked failure, and I think I brought that same approach to college. Like I intentionally avoided things that I thought I would be good at because I knew I wouldn't really be happy unless I was really being pushed to like my absolute limits. If
Wow,
that makes
that's admirable.
Yeah, it was very hard.
Well,
Still,
yeah, he chose that path though. That's cool.
it's my path. Yeah, and that's what I'm gonna embark on. Yeah,
Yep, Marcus agrees. All right. Well, we're gonna say goodnight here. It's almost 11 o'clock. You're in Boston, so I know you're in the same time zone as me, which
yeah,
means it's bedtime. That's the
yeah,
time zone. Bedtime on a Wednesday night. We still got less than half of the week ahead of us until the weekend.
yeah,
The
yeah.
long weekend, the wonderful long weekend.
Thankfully, yeah,
I can finally get some work done.
yeah,
It's for you. Well, thank God I can finally plan for the next week of school on Monday.
yeah,
But but it was great having you here, Hezekiah. It was a wonderful conversation. Very insightful. I learned a lot, which is something personally I like to get out of these, and I'm sure everyone else that's watching and listening learned as well. And thank you for being here.
yeah. Thank you for having me. It's been a blast. Glad to be a part of your show.
Appreciate it. And everyone else, good night. And I'm not sure when my next stream will be because it's a long weekend. I'll be spending a lot of it with family, but
Yeah,
uh, we'll be back again in the future. In fact, let me bring up our next chat member. We will be talking with Carlotta. And so that's going to be a great one. That's she's a teacher and she does a lot of maker engineering stuff. So
love it. Making
so
sports.
yep. So she's I've had her in the pipeline for a long time. So Carlotta, Dr. Barry, call her Professor Barry.
Awesome.
So you can catch her at Dr. C.A. Barry on Twitter. So
Cool.
engineering and robotics. So that's next week. So, but Hezekiah, thank you for being here, and everyone else, good night, goodbye.
Thank you.